So today I'm trying something a little different. We're going to have a punctuated graphic homily. So, okay. You've probably ascertained what the theme is. Next. It's about being busy. Have you spoken to anyone recently who said, I have absolutely nothing but time? No appointments, no meetings, no babysitting the grandchildren, no work, no committees to serve on, no invitations for lunch, no dinner parties, not going to church, not a blessed thing on my calendar. Well, next. So, being busy, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean that you have a jam-packed day every day? Does it mean you are happily and easily moving from one meaningful task to another? Chances are it doesn't. So, trying to put a dinner party together for just a few close friends, attempting to have lunch with an ex-coworker, plan a surprise birthday party for your spouse, waiting to see if you can synchronize calendars, and just how long does that take you? Unlike that. Dilbert gives us an idea. Sadly, research shows that Americans believe that the busier a person is, the higher status we attribute to that person. So, think about it. You can always get an appointment within a week with your doctor? Just how good is he? Can't get in to see a recommended specialist for 6 months? She must be really, really good. It says, I want to feel important. I want other people to feel that I'm important when we're busy. So we've got a to-do list. Melissa Mazmanian, who's a sociologist from UC Irvine, wrote a book entitled Dreams of the Overworked, Living, Working, and Parenting in the Digital Age. And her research analyzes why American adults struggle with overwork and this unmanageable busyness that she says goes beyond schedules. So I quote her, "We've become so committed to the idea of doing it all is what the goal is. That this is productivity, that this is what I need to do to feel good about who I am in the world." And so that optimism comes with the idea that I'm actually getting a lot of pleasure and satisfaction from feeling like I can be a superhero. So let's look at the schedules here. We've got a flow chart of an adult and of a child. Even sadder still, we're programming our kids the same way. For those of us of a certain age, we didn't need our parents to make appointments with other parents so that we could play with our friends. I look back fondly at those days and just assume that pedophiles hadn't been invented yet. That we'd already been taught how to look both ways before crossing a street. And we made our own fun. We created our own games. Now, out of the best intentions or belief systems that dictate the more activities a child is involved in, the more likely they are to get into Harvard. Don't laugh. There are preschools in Manhattan that tout how many of their little ones got into Ivy League schools. 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds who later get into Ivy League. That's nuts. Just nuts. And there are costs to parents who, in terms of time it takes to shuffling kids to dance lessons, sports teams, art lessons, band practice, not to mention working mothers trying to organize their time so they can take their share of the driving burden. And nearly 1 in 4 parents with a kid enrolled in a competitive extracurricular activity spends $4,000 or more in that activity. But overscheduling children is possible and can actually do more harm than good, including causing too much stress, reducing opportunities to engage in creative thinking, and having detrimental effects on attention span and mental health. Constant exposure to structured activities can create stimulation junkies, which are children who constantly seek sensory input. Think of hours spent on video games, and cannot handle boredom or time alone. Research shows that by age 13, 3 out of 4 children who participated in several organized activities have tossed their tennis rackets or scout uniforms or music books. And this is true for most kids who started these activities before the 1st grade. But they are more likely to complain about being bored too. Research has revealed that these kids have never learned to use their inner resources to keep themselves busy. They come to expect they will be entertained and occupied all the time. But it's important that kids be alone sometimes to work things out for themselves. And there are parallels between the child who is kept busy, rarely alone, and the complaint of boredom, and the adult who keeps a schedule so tight they can barely fit time for a cup of coffee with their very best friend. So, the most productive morning. There are many adults who confuse activity with productivity. The child who is rarely left to herself is flummoxed when organized activities aren't fun anymore and can't tolerate time without stimulation. Okay, let's go to. Okay, time for a dad joke. Have you ever tried eating a clock? It's very time consuming. Okay, yeah, okay. Now, this slide perfectly captures what I do for a living. I remember being absolutely gobsmacked when it was published as an illustration for the New York Times. It was a book review. So taken aback was I, in fact, that I cut this out in October of 2021. I saved it. And then earlier this year, I contacted the author, who's in California, and asked for his permission to use it in presentations. And he very graciously granted me the use. I conduct interviews and focus groups, primarily with patients, physicians, and all kinds of folks in the healthcare world, including insurance providers, those people who bring you denials. Intrinsic to my work is also background research on products, services, new developments, and even my clients. Tell you a funny story. So a client comes to us and says, we want to do 30-something interviews, people on Medicare Advantage. Okay. And so I did a little digging. We didn't get much in terms of, we knew their objective, but not the why. So I did a little bit of digging and dug some more and dug again and found out that those kind people from CMS, the people who bring you Medicare and Medicaid, had slapped them something silly and had told them they were not allowed to expand their territory until 2027. I passed this news on to the VPs, and they went, oh, then they got it. That was not something that the client themselves shared with us. I love a little digging. That's why I'm a researcher. So it takes many meetings with clients to understand exactly what they want to learn. My discussion guides are subject to multiple rounds of feedback from the client. With junior members on the client team, it is not uncommon for them to introduce wayward theories or dust into the process, in turn, which forces me to bring experience, reason, and knowledge. But I also try to carefully listen for that offhand remark by a senior client. It can end up being more crucial to the research process than originally envisioned. So I try to make sense out of that. You can see here that there are several entry points for distraction, invitations to multitask, and many interruptions. And I'm sure this graphic fits all kinds of work that people do or have done here. I bet it even involves some of our, committees. Okay, now, so let's go on to some facts here. So, the average American office worker now focuses on only one task for only 3 minutes. When research was conducted with folks who had no access to email for 5 days, they were less stressed. Email causes stress. It's not just a correlation, it is a causality. Think about a whiteboard for a moment. Things are written on it and then they're erased away. Sometimes when we switch our attention, we might get really caught up in something like, I don't know, 34 counts, guilty, anyway. You read about some event, and then you switch back to whatever project you were working on, but that event kind of stays with you. Just like sometimes you can't erase that whiteboard. You see traces of what was written on it. Same thing happens in our minds, and that residue can interfere with the current task at hand. So, multitasking. So, technology was created to enhance our capabilities. We can write faster. We can connect with people faster. We can produce more. A lot of what was formerly done face-to-face in meetings or going into other people's offices or even taking airplanes to go see your clients in person is now done at the desktop through email or Zoom. I Zoom a lot. Have to look good from the waist up. Waist down, shorts, flip-flops. There were studies done in the 60s, 70s, and 80s where researchers followed people around and tracked the percentage of time they spent at their desks. And this was only roughly 30% of the day. In 2019, a similar study found that people spent nearly 90% of their time at their desks. So on one hand, you can think, oh, it's more efficient, but there's a cost to that. And the cost is our well-being. The cost is stress. An extended use of technology without breaks can even lead to burnout. There's a psychological theory, it's called the broaden and build theory, that showed that when people experience positive emotion, they actually produced more. They were more creative. And so the upshot is When we experience positive well-being, we can produce more. Think about it as we start our day with a tank of cognitive resources. You can think of it as kind of our attentional capacity. And there are things that we do during the day that deplete our attentional capacity, like watching kids, focusing for a very long time on our computer, or multitasking. There are other things that we do that replenish our resources, like taking a break. And there's the part of our mind called the executive functioning. It helps us make decisions, helps us filter out distractions, helps us stay on track. But when our cognitive resources drain, then the executive function just doesn't work as well as it can. We try harder to stay on track, to stay focused, and the end result is we just get exhausted. So, why are video games so popular with kids? You don't have to investigate the research on video games for too long to realize that dopamine plays a key role in the appeal of video games. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that becomes active when people participate in something that's fun and pleasurable, like video games. Some research has shown that that dopamine levels rise when kids play these games, and therefore they want to keep getting a hit of this dopamine. Some researchers have discussed this rise in dopamine as a serious phenomena, even equating it to drug addiction. It's important to remember that dopamine rises whenever we do anything important and enjoyable. Eat ice cream, win a sporting event, have our boss pat us on the back for a great job. But most studies have concluded that this rise of dopamine while playing video games is similar to other activities, which is substantially lower than the rise of dopamine seen in drug users. Nevertheless, it's helpful for parents to understand the role of dopamine in their kids' brains as they play video games. Just like you would not let your child eat unlimited ice cream, I would hope, because it makes them feel good, limiting video game time is also necessary so this dopamine effect doesn't become overwhelming. And this also ties in with the idea of being bored, needing constant stimulation. Some research has shown that repeatedly reinforcing this dopamine pathway can make the receptors less active, so more dopamine is needed in the future to get that pleasurable feeling. And if you just heard the links to drug addiction, you're right. That's exactly how it works. So, the bottom line here. You might be thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, Pamela, but so what? I didn't come to church for a lecture. I came for some inspiration. What gives? Well, okay, I'm glad you asked, because this quotation here, Ezra Klein, who is an outstanding New York Times journalist and an opinion page writer, he said, and I was just struck by this, the things you pay attention to make up your life. I think a lot of people do try and keep themselves busy because it's a distraction, from some bigger existential questions that arise about our life here on Earth and the time we spend here. So creating a sense of busyness for yourself can lead to a feeling that you have, some sort of reason for being here. There's some existential dread of too much idleness. If you have too much time, your mind might go to dark places. So, when I was about 9 or 10, I remember lying back on the grass in the garden behind our house next to daffodils and tulips. So it must have been April in Montclair, New Jersey, a Manhattan's suburb. I remember looking up at the clouds, observing their shapes. I heard airplanes, undoubtedly heading for Newark Airport. It would have been the late 1950s. I have the distinct memory of wondering why I had been put on Earth at that time and in that place. Why not earlier or later in history? Why in suburban New Jersey? What would my adult life look like? What purpose or porpoise would my life serve? When I related this story to my Manhattan therapist in the 1980s, her reaction was incredulous. She said, "I thought I was the only weird kid who thought things like that." I think my admission further bonded us. I can't help, though, but wonder if today's kids think these thoughts. Do they have time to lie on their backs in the grass? Are they even allowed to lie in the grass? But I also wonder if, as adults, we allow ourselves to ponder these questions. Most of us won't lie down in the grass for fear of not being able to get up, and our loved ones would be doing a test for orientation of time, place, and person. But I certainly don't ask those questions of people at our UU open houses. Perhaps married couples have these kinds of conversations. I know I didn't ask about the meaning of life with either of the men I lived with. So go on to smell the roses and focus on what really matters. Next. And this concludes my sermon.